What happens to a man when the one person who gave meaning to his existence is suddenly gone? A man who has lived his life in service, who has endured duty, who has stood quietly while the storms of monarchy battered those around him. That is the haunting question now hanging over the Duke of Kent as he sits in his twilight years, facing a grief that even his titles, lineage, and royal blood cannot shield him from. He said it himself in words that cut deeper than any headline. I won't survive. But why did he say this now? Why at this very moment, as Britain mourns the passing of his wife Catherine, Duchess of Kent, at the age of 92? Was it despair, or was it a coded message about something more than love and loss? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This is not just the story of a death. It is the story of an ending, of a goodbye that feels heavier than all the others. For the Duke of Kent is not just a man mourning his wife. He is a royal who has carried the burden of history, loyalty, and expectation for decades. And now, stripped of the partner who anchored him, he teeters between survival and surrender. You can almost feel the weight in his words. They are not simply the laments of an old widower. They are confessions from a man who has nothing left to lose. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, why does this story matter? Why, among all the royal dramas, does this particular farewell feel so raw, so urgent, so deeply unsettling? Perhaps it's because, for once, a royal is not hiding behind polished statements or stiff upper lips. For once, the mask has slipped. And behind it, there is only pain. The kind of pain that makes a man wonder whether he can keep breathing without the one who breathed life into him. Think about it. The Duke and Duchess of Kent were together for nearly 60 years. 60 years of laughter, of whispered conversations late at night, of shared worries that never made it to the newspapers. Can you imagine what it feels like to lose the person who has been beside you longer than anyone else? To wake up in a grand palace room that suddenly feels colder, emptier, because the other side of the bed is no longer filled? Even in the gilded corridors of royalty, loneliness can echo louder than any ceremony. And it is that loneliness which now wraps around the Duke like a shroud. But let us not forget who Catherine was. She was not just the wife of a duke. She was not simply a duchess in name. She was a woman who chose silence over spectacle, who turned away from the spotlight when others ran toward it. Do you know how rare that is in a family obsessed with appearances? While other royals performed their roles on the grand stage, Catherine slipped quietly into the background, becoming almost invisible to the public eye. And yet, in that invisibility, she was perhaps the most authentic of them all. She chose privacy. She chose her health. She chose her peace. And maybe, just maybe, that is why her death stings even more. Because we never really knew her, and now we never will. Imagine the Duke sitting alone after the funeral, surrounded by portraits and photographs, each one a memory that now feels like a dagger. He is 90 years old, frail, his steps slower, his hands trembling. But the tremble is not just age, it is grief. When he says, I won't survive, he is not exaggerating. He means it. Because for him, survival is not simply about living another day. Survival was tied to her presence. Without Catherine, his survival feels meaningless. Can you picture that? A man with the world at his feet, stripped down to the raw truth that he cannot bear to live without the woman who once made life bearable. And yet, this is not just about romance or personal despair. This is about the monarchy itself. Do you realize the Duke of Kent is one of the last living links to the older generation of royals, the one that still carried the weight of war, tradition, and unshakable duty? He walked beside Queen Elizabeth at Trooping the Color for decades. He was the constant shadow, always present, always dependable. If he falls, if his grief consumes him, then another pillar of the monarchy collapses. Britain does not just lose a man, it loses a symbol. That is why this story matters now. Because it is not just his personal survival at stake. It is the survival of memory, tradition, and an entire chapter of royal history. But let's not race too quickly into the future. Let us linger here, in the present moment of his despair. Close your eyes and imagine the scene. The Duke standing in St. George's Chapel, his eyes fixed on the coffin draped in flowers. The air is heavy, the silence broken only by the choir's haunting hymns. Everyone is watching him, relatives, friends, courtiers. But he doesn't see them. His gaze is locked on her, and only her. For all the grandeur of the service, it feels like a private moment between two souls, one leaving, the other left behind. And in that moment, the Duke whispers words that only a handful of ears caught. Words that left his family stunned. Words that will ripple through the next chapters of this story. Do you see how contradiction runs through this tale? A royal life, lived in duty, ended in raw humanity. A man who outwardly served the crown, now crying out in weakness. A duchess who avoided the spotlight, now pulling it onto her memory through her very absence. There is irony in all of it, almost as if fate itself wanted to remind us that behind the crowns and titles, there are still human beings who break, who weep, who collapse under the weight of loss. And yet, even as we explore this grief, something else stirs. Questions begin to surface. What did Catherine leave behind for him? Did she write him a final letter, hidden away among her belongings? Did she whisper something in her final moments that only he knows? Why is his reaction so much more dramatic than the stoic silence we've seen from other royals in times of loss? Could it be that there is more to this goodbye than we are being told? That is where the story deepens. Because every great love has its hidden chapters, its unspoken sacrifices, its concealed regrets. The Duke of Kent is not just mourning a wife. He is mourning a lifetime of secrets that may never be revealed. And if he truly believes he cannot survive without her, perhaps those secrets will surface sooner than we think. Perhaps the truth will come out, piece by piece, as his frailty cracks open the walls he once built around his private life. So, I ask you, what would you do if you were him? Would you cling to life for the sake of your family? Or would you surrender, following the one you love into the shadows? Would you reveal the secrets you've guarded for decades, or would you take them to the grave, leaving only questions behind? This is not just a royal story, it is a human one. And it is precisely that humanity which grips us now, refusing to let go. But remember what I told you at the beginning. The Duke whispered something after Catherine's passing, something that left his family frozen in stunned silence. What were those words? What could he possibly have said that carries more weight than even his heartbreaking declaration of not surviving? That, my friends, is where our journey truly begins. Because those words were not simply the cries of grief, they were a revelation. And what came next would change everything, in ways no one saw coming. What could a man possibly whisper in the shadow of his wife's coffin that would leave even his closest family speechless? That is the haunting question hanging over St. George's Chapel in those final moments. The hymns faded, the organ's notes lingered like ghosts in the rafters, and the Duke's lips moved with words too low for most to catch. But those who did, those who leaned in close, say his message was not just grief, but something else. Something almost like a confession. Can you imagine it? A frail 90-year-old royal, shoulders bent under the weight of both history and heartbreak, leaning toward the coffin of the woman who stood by him for nearly 60 years, and saying something that his family has not dared repeat publicly. Why? What was so powerful that it had to be kept hidden? Was it love? Was it regret? Or was it a secret only he and Catherine knew, now laid bare in whispers too heavy for the world? Think about the contradiction for a moment. Here was a man whose life has been governed by ceremony, by the careful choreography of the monarchy, by speeches drafted by courtiers and words polished to perfection. Yet in the moment that mattered most, his words broke free, raw, unpolished, unguarded. Isn't that what we crave to see from royals? The mask slipping, the truth revealed? And yet, when it happens, it terrifies us, because it reminds us that these figures of power are fragile, just like us. Now let's step back in time. To understand why that moment shook his family, we must revisit how this love story began. Because the truth is, the Duke of Kent and Catherine's marriage was never just another royal match. It was a collision of tradition and rebellion, of love and sacrifice. And unless you understand the fire that lit their relationship in the beginning, you cannot fully grasp the ashes he now sifts through in her absence. Picture this: London, early 1960s. The city is alive with change. Rock music and smoky clubs, women demanding independence, a younger generation rejecting the stiff rules of their elders. And into this whirlwind steps Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, the tall, handsome cousin of Queen Elizabeth. He was expected to marry appropriately, to follow the royal script, to secure a match that would strengthen the crown. But then came Catherine Worsley. She was not a starlet. She was not a political pawn. She was a woman with quiet strength, a passion for music, and an inner dignity that could not be bought. When Edward met her, something shifted. It was not the calculated spark of duty. It was genuine connection. Isn't that rare in royal circles? Don't we often hear of marriages arranged more for the sake of optics than emotion? And yet, here was a royal who seemed determined to carve out his own path, regardless of the whispers echoing through palace corridors. But love in the royal family is never simple, is it? Behind the romance was tension. Behind the smiles at their wedding was resistance. Some courtiers whispered doubts. Some members of the family muttered about Catherine not being royal enough. Even then, the crown clung to outdated rules about bloodlines and suitability. Yet Edward chose her. He risked disapproval. He risked the raised eyebrows of the very institution he served. Why? Because he saw in Catherine something worth defying tradition for. And here lies the irony. Catherine herself was never chasing the throne, never yearning for the limelight. Quite the opposite. She recoiled from it. She found the attention overwhelming, the duties exhausting. She would later retreat almost completely from public life, baffling those who measured royal worth by public appearances and photo ops. But Edward stood by her. He didn't abandon her because she couldn't face the stage. He shielded her. He understood her. Doesn't that tell you everything about the depth of their love? Now, here's where the twist comes in. While the world assumed they had a storybook romance, behind palace walls, they paid a price. The crown never forgave easily. Catherine's decision to step back, to prioritize her health and sanity over spectacle, left Edward in a strange position. He remained the loyal royal, attending ceremonies, marching in uniform, standing at the Queen's side. While at home, he was tending to a wife who was quietly unraveling under the weight of expectation. Can you imagine the contradiction he lived daily? Public strength, private fragility. This is why his whispered words over her coffin matter so much. Because they weren't just about losing a wife. They were about losing the one person who made that dual existence bearable. Without her, the contradiction becomes unbearable. And that is why he says, "I won't survive." It's not melodrama. It's truth. But let's not sanitize this story. Their love was deep, yes, but it was also complicated. Catherine suffered. She endured depression, health struggles, the relentless pressure of being married to a royal without ever fully embracing the role. And Edward, though loyal, was not immune to the flaws of a man bound to an ancient system. There were whispers, rumors of affairs, of distractions, of cracks in the perfect picture. Yet somehow, through it all, they held on to each other. Doesn't that complexity make their love more human, more real, than the fairy tales painted in glossy magazines? The funeral brought all of these contradictions crashing into one moment. Royals in polished black coats, hymns echoing in an ancient chapel, cameras flashing outside, and a grieving old man whispering words that shook his children, his grandchildren, and perhaps even the monarchy itself. Words that seemed to suggest Catherine's death was not just an ending, but the unraveling of the Duke's own life. But here's the question we must wrestle with. What did he mean by, "I won't survive"? Was it literal, a confession that he feels his own death looming? Or was it metaphorical, a way of saying that without Catherine, his spirit, his purpose, his will to endure has vanished? And what if it was something else entirely, a reference to secrets they shared, to burdens they carried together, to truths that may now spill into the light? Ask yourself this. If you spent 60 years with someone who knew every flaw, every fear, every private joy you could never reveal to the world, wouldn't losing them feel like losing yourself? Wouldn't it feel like survival was impossible? That is what we are witnessing in the Duke's grief. Not just loss, but identity stripped away. And yet, this is only the beginning. Because in their early courtship, in the days before duty hardened into routine, there was one moment that the Duke has reportedly clung to, replaying it over and over in his mind since Catherine's passing. A moment so small, so seemingly insignificant, that no one noticed it at the time. And yet, to him, it has become the defining memory of their love story. What was it? Why does this single memory haunt him now, more than any grand event or royal ceremony? And why, after whispering his devastating confession, did he suddenly tell his children about it in words that left them shaken? That, my friends, is where we turn next. Because the memory the Duke of Kent cannot stop replaying may hold the key to understanding not just his grief, but the hidden truth about the love story that defined his entire life. And when you hear it, you may never look at their marriage the same way again. What kind of memory can outshine decades of royal ceremonies, military salutes, and moments in the Queen's presence? What could possibly be so small, so ordinary, that it eclipses a lifetime of grandeur, and yet become the one thing a duke cannot stop replaying in his mind? It wasn't a state banquet. It wasn't a coronation. It wasn't a parade down the mall with the Union Jack waving in the wind. No, it was a glance, a laugh, a single moment in their early courtship that burned into his soul and never let go. Picture this: a young Edward, still carrying the weight of his royal name, but not yet hardened by years of duty. Picture Catherine, fresh-faced, spirited, and utterly uninterested in the trappings of royalty. They were walking through the gardens at Hovingham Hall, her family estate. The sun was low, the grass damp from a summer rain, and Catherine, rather than playing the role of a demure future duchess, splashed through a puddle like a child. Can you imagine the scandalized whispers if courtiers had been watching? But Edward didn't scold her. He laughed, and more than that, he realized in that very moment that this woman was different. Why does such a trivial moment matter? Because for Edward, surrounded his whole life by rules, structure, and performance, Catherine was the opposite. She was freedom. She was authenticity. She was a glimpse of life unchained from the suffocating expectations of the monarchy. And in that puddle splash, he saw his future, not a royal partner, but a human one. Isn't it striking that a lifetime of protocol could be undone by something as silly as wet shoes? Now, fast forward 6 decades. Catherine is gone. The house is quiet. And the Duke, frail and grieving, keeps replaying that scene. Why? Because it captures everything he has lost. Not the Duchess, not the royal consort, but the girl who splashed through puddles, the woman who laughed without caring who might be watching. The memory becomes both comfort and torment. Comfort, because it reminds him of who she really was. Torment, because it makes her absence unbearable. But here's the twist. The Duke did not keep this memory to himself. In the days after the funeral, he shared it with his children. He told them about the puddle, the laugh, the freedom. And then he said something that froze them. That was the day I chose her over the crown. Think about that. A royal man admitting that his marriage was not just about love. It was a rebellion, a choice. In that one moment, he defied the system that raised him. And for 6 decades, he carried the tension of that choice. Serving the crown, yes, but never forgetting that in his heart, he had chosen Catherine over duty. Isn't that a staggering admission? It also explains the whisper at the funeral. I won't survive. Because without Catherine, the rebellion is over. The fight he waged silently for 60 years has ended. And without her, the weight of the crown presses in heavier than ever. He is no longer the man who chose love over duty. He is only the man left behind by the woman who made that choice possible. But let us not romanticize too quickly. Choosing Catherine over the crown did not mean life was easy. Quite the opposite. From the very start, the pressures of royal life intruded. There were arguments about how public Catherine should be, how many engagements she should attend, how she should carry herself. She was thrust into a world she never fully wanted, and it took a toll. Depression, anxiety, retreat. The palace spun it as ill health, but insiders whispered about the Duchess being unable or unwilling to play the royal game. And through it all, the Duke stood at a crossroads. Do you see the contradiction? He had chosen her, yet he was still bound to the monarchy. He marched in uniform, saluted beside the Queen, upheld the duties his position demanded. In public, he was the image of loyalty. In private, he was a man holding together a marriage weighed down by expectations that Catherine simply could not endure. How many nights do you think he lay awake wondering if he had doomed her by marrying her into this gilded cage? This is the emotional heart of the story. Because love is not just romance, it is sacrifice. And Edward sacrificed his peace of mind for her. He shielded her. He covered for her absences. He endured the whispers of courtiers who dismissed her as weak, fragile, or unwilling. He bore it because of that puddle, because of that laugh, because of the choice he made long ago. And now, with her gone, the question haunts him. Was it enough? Did he give her the life she deserved? Or did he chain her to the very system he once rebelled against? And let's not ignore the darker whispers. For while Catherine stepped back, Edward's name surfaced in the gossip mills more than once. Rumors of affairs, of indiscretions, of a man seeking comfort in places his wife could not follow. Were they true? The palace would never confirm. The press hinted but never proved. And yet, even if they were, the marriage endured. Why? Because perhaps Catherine knew the truth, that Edward was a man torn in half, and that she, despite everything, was still the one half he could not live without. Doesn't that complexity make their bond even more tragic, even more human? So now we return to the family, sitting in silence after his revelation. That was the day I chose her over the crown. His children exchanged glances. They had always known their parents' marriage was unusual, but to hear their father confess that his entire life's path was decided by a puddle splash in Yorkshire, it reframed everything. It turned their mother's quiet withdrawal, their father's rigid duty, their family's contradictions, into something more than circumstance. It became destiny. But then, Edward added something else. Something that sent a chill through the room. And she left me something. Something only I can carry now. What was it? A letter? A secret? A confession meant to outlive her, but not him? His words trailed off, and no one pressed him further. But the implication was clear. Catherine's story did not end with her death. She left behind something unfinished, something that the Duke now bears alone. And that brings us back to his whisper over the coffin. Maybe, "I won't survive," wasn't just grief. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe he knows that whatever Catherine left him is too heavy to carry. Maybe, in losing her, he has inherited not just loneliness but a burden he cannot withstand. So what do you think it is? A private letter sealed away in her jewelry box? A truth about their marriage that could scandalize the monarchy? A revelation about her years in silence, her health, or even the choices they made together? One thing is certain. The Duke's story is no longer just about mourning. It is about what comes next. Because when a man on the edge of life itself says he cannot survive, and hints at carrying something his wife left behind, you know this love story is not finished. It is about to take a turn that no one saw coming. But what did Catherine leave him? What could possibly be so significant that it shakes a man already drowning in grief? That, my friends, is where the story turns darker. And when you hear it, you will realize that the Duchess of Kent's legacy may not be the quiet silence the world assumed, but a secret that could outlive the Duke himself. This section is complete. What could Catherine possibly have left behind that was so heavy, so charged, that the Duke himself admitted only he could carry it? Was it a final letter, written in her fragile hand, confessing truths long buried beneath royal protocol? Was it a story she had never dared to speak aloud, but one that demanded to be told after her death? Or was it something far more intimate, something that could change how history remembers both of them? The truth is, Catherine's legacy is not what the public thinks. To most of Britain, she was the quiet duchess, the woman who slipped out of royal life like a shadow disappearing at dusk. No scandals, no speeches, no grand declarations. But what if her silence was not weakness? What if it was strategy? A deliberate choice, not to hide from life, but to hide life itself? Let's rewind. Catherine Worsley did not grow up in a palace. She was not born into the Windsor machine. She was the daughter of a baronet, raised in North Yorkshire, steeped not in pomp, but in grounded country life. She was, in many ways, refreshingly ordinary. And perhaps that is what made her so extraordinary to Edward. He saw in her what the crown could never provide, a normalcy, a warmth, a realness he had been denied since birth. But what happens when someone ordinary marries into something as suffocating as the monarchy? Do they transform into what the crown needs? Or do they retreat into themselves, creating a hidden world the public will never see? Catherine chose retreat. She chose silence. Officially, her reasons were health-related. Depression, exhaustion, the crushing anxiety of royal duties. But what if that wasn't the whole story? What if Catherine's withdrawal from public life was tied to something deeper, something she confided only to Edward? Could this be what she left him? A truth he now carries, one that he cannot, or will not, share with the world? Now, imagine the emotional weight of that for the Duke. For decades, he was two men. Publicly, the stalwart royal, marching in uniform, saluting at trooping the color, ever loyal to his cousin the queen. Privately, the protector of a wife who refused to play the royal game. He covered for her absences. He deflected questions. He endured whispers. All while knowing the real reason she stepped back was a truth too explosive or too painful for the world to hear. And here's where the contradiction burns brightest. The monarchy thrives on image, on appearances, on continuity. Catherine shattered that image by walking away. But in walking away, she revealed her truest self. Doesn't that sound almost ironic? The only way to survive the monarchy was to abandon it. And Edward, though loyal to the crown, chose to stand by her. He held her silence. He bore her secret. And now, in her death, he is left with the burden alone. But let me ask you this. What do you think it feels like to be the last keeper of a secret? To hold knowledge so personal, so powerful, that it defines not only your marriage, but your very identity? Do you speak it? Do you pass it on? Or do you guard it with your final breath, ensuring it dies with you? That is the torment Edward now faces. There are whispers that Catherine wrote letters. Letters not just to him, but to others. Letters that may one day surface, offering glimpses into her private truth. Perhaps those letters reveal the real reason she disappeared from public life. Perhaps they explain why she sometimes looked so distant, so haunted, even in the brief glimpses we caught of her. And perhaps, just perhaps, they contain words that the Duke knows will tear open wounds the monarchy cannot bear. So he holds them. He shields them. Because if he speaks, the narrative changes. Catherine is no longer the fragile duchess who faded quietly into the background. She becomes something else entirely. A woman who chose silence not out of weakness, but out of strength. And in revealing that, Edward risks revealing himself too. Let's not forget, this is a man who once confessed, at his wife's coffin no less, that he could not survive without her. What does that tell you? It tells you that Catherine was not just his wife. She was his anchor, his shield, his partner in defiance. Without her, he is exposed, vulnerable, and burdened with a truth too heavy to share. Think about the irony here. For decades, the monarchy depended on Catherine's absence. Her silence protected the family. It kept the focus on others, on the Queen, on Charles, on Diana, on William and Harry. She slipped into the shadows so they could shine. But now, in death, her silence is louder than ever. Because it is the silence of a secret left behind. And Edward knows it. That is why he whispered, "I won't survive." It was not just about grief. It was about being left alone with something he cannot carry. Now, here's the twist you didn't see coming. Sources close to the family say that in her final months, Catherine told Edward something that shook him. A confession, a revelation, a truth she had buried for years. And she made him promise to keep it. But can a 90-year-old man, broken by grief, really keep such a promise? Or will the weight of it break him? This is where the story takes a darker turn. Because there is speculation, quiet, hushed speculation, that Catherine's retreat from public life was not solely about her health. That something happened, something behind palace walls, that made her step back permanently. Could it have been betrayal? Could it have been a scandal smothered before it saw daylight? Could it have been the kind of truth that, if revealed, would ripple through the monarchy even now? We may never know, but Edward knows. And that knowledge is the heaviest inheritance he has ever received. So I ask you, if you were him, would you tell the truth? Would you unburden yourself before death, risking the stability of the monarchy for the sake of honesty? Or would you guard it, protect it, even as it consumes you from the inside? Because here is the chilling part. Insiders say Edward has already begun preparing something. Something that will not be seen until after his death. A letter? A memoir? A sealed document? Whatever it is, it may contain Catherine's final secret. And when it comes out, it could change how history remembers them both. But until then, the Duke remains trapped. Trapped between loyalty and love. Trapped between silence and truth. Trapped between surviving and surrendering. And this brings us to the question haunting his family now. Will the Duke's grief consume him quickly, as he fears? Or will he hold on just long enough to ensure Catherine's secret is kept, or revealed, on his own terms? One thing is certain. Catherine's story did not end with her death. It began a new chapter. A chapter where silence is no longer peace, but a ticking clock. And when that clock strikes, Britain may find that the quiet Duchess was far louder than anyone ever imagined. But before that day comes, we must journey deeper into the Duke's own struggles, the loneliness that now surrounds him, the weight of duty without love, and the whispers of mortality closing in. Because if his words are to be believed, "I won't survive," then the end may be closer than any of us realize. What does it mean when a man says he will not survive without the woman he loves? Is it just poetry, the language of grief, or is it a literal countdown to the end? The Duke's words have forced Britain to ask this question, and the answer may be darker than anyone is ready to admit. Because grief does not just live in the heart. It seeps into the body. It hollows out the spirit. It weakens the will to endure. And when you are 90 years old, already frail, already worn down by decades of duty, the loss of the one person who gave your life meaning can be enough to break you. Look at history. Time and again, we see it. Couples who spend their lives together often do not last long apart. Have you heard the phrase broken heart syndrome? Doctors have a name for it: stress cardiomyopathy. The body literally shuts down under the weight of grief. Husbands die weeks after their wives. Wives collapse months after their husbands. It is not coincidence. It is love refusing to live without its other half. And now the question hangs heavy over the Duke of Kent. Is he next? Think about his life in this moment. The funeral is over. The tributes have been given. The flowers have begun to wilt. The palace corridors grow quiet again. But in that silence, what does he hear? The creak of a chair where Catherine once sat. The soft echo of her voice in rooms now empty. The weight of loneliness pressing against his chest at dawn, when he wakes and reaches instinctively for a hand that is no longer there. How do you survive that? This is the cruel irony of royal life. Surrounded by people, servants, courtiers, guards, yet utterly alone. Cameras outside the gates, newspapers printing headlines about his grief. Yet no one truly understands what it means to lose the one who shielded you from yourself. And here's the contradiction. The Duke has always been the picture of loyalty, the man who never wavered in service to the monarchy. For 70 years, he stood beside the Queen at Trooping the Color, marching in full uniform, his presence a symbol of continuity. Strong, unshakable, dependable. But behind that uniform, behind that salute, was a man held together by Catherine's quiet presence. She was his anchor, his balance. Without her, the uniform feels heavier, the duty meaningless. Can you see how survival itself becomes questionable when the one reason for enduring is gone? Now let me ask you this. What happens when a man loses his will to survive? Does he fade quietly, slipping away in his sleep, or does he rage against it, trying to hold on a little longer? Insiders say the Duke's health has declined rapidly since Catherine's passing. He moves slower. His voice is weaker. His spirit seems fractured. Some even whisper he looks like a man waiting, not fighting. Waiting for the moment when grief carries him to her side. But here's the chilling twist. Before Catherine died, she told him something that may have planted the very seed of his despair. We talked about the possibility of a secret, a burden left to him. But what if it wasn't just a secret? What if it was a warning? A truth so devastating that it made him believe he truly cannot survive without her? Could that be why his children looked so shaken after his whispered words at the funeral? Could they know more than they are willing to admit? And this is where the monarchy itself begins to tremble. Because if the Duke collapses under grief, if his health deteriorates rapidly, it will not just be another private tragedy. It will be another public blow to a monarchy already weakened by scandal, loss, and transition. Remember, the crown has only just begun to stabilize under Charles after the death of Queen Elizabeth. Another death, especially one so steeped in whispers of despair, would cast an even darker shadow. Do you see how this story spirals beyond one man's grief? It becomes a reflection of the monarchy itself. The Duke's survival, or lack of it, mirrors the fragility of the institution. Strong on the outside, fragile within. But let's not lose sight of the human heart in all of this. Edward is not just a royal. He is a man sitting in his chair at Kensington Palace, staring at an empty teacup across the table. He is a man opening drawers and finding Catherine's handkerchiefs, still folded neatly. He is a man touching photographs and whispering to them as if she might answer. This is grief not polished for the cameras. This is grief raw, unfiltered, and dangerously consuming. And yet, in the middle of this darkness, there is another contradiction. The Duke is a man of faith. a man raised in traditions that promise reunion beyond death. Could his despair also be hope in disguise? Could his words, "I won't survive," be less a surrender and more a declaration of intent? That he will follow her, that he will not fight the inevitable, that he believes he will see her again soon? That is what terrifies his family, because it means his words are not just grief. They are prophecy. But what if they are also a message? What if, hidden in his despair, is a signal to the monarchy itself? A warning that the old ways are collapsing, that the burden of silence and secrecy is too much to bear, that even the most loyal of royals cannot endure forever without love? Could it be that his personal collapse is also the monarchy's collapse, a slow unraveling in plain sight? Ask yourself, how long can a 90-year-old man, hollowed out by grief, truly survive? Weeks? Months? A year? History tells us it will not be long. His own words tell us he does not want it to be long. And yet, something else looms. Something even heavier than grief. Because if Catherine truly left him a secret, then the Duke's survival is about more than life and death. It is about whether he takes that secret with him to the grave, or whether it explodes into the world before he goes. That is the tension now. Will the Duke fade quietly, leaving the monarchy untouched? Or will his grief push him to release what Catherine left him, unraveling everything before the end? We do not know. But what we do know is this. His words, "I won't survive," are not just a cry of despair. They are a countdown, a warning, a prophecy. And as Britain watches him slip further into loneliness, one question grows louder with every passing day. What will break first, the man or the secret he carries? What will break first, the man or the secret he carries? That's the question hanging like a storm cloud over Kensington Palace. And to answer it, we must step back into the life of Catherine, Duchess of Kent, the woman who shaped this entire tragedy not through spectacle, but through silence. Because if we want to understand the secret the Duke may now be crumbling under, we need to understand her. Who was Catherine before the title? Before the pressure? Before the retreat into shadows that left the world confused and the Duke quietly protective? Here's a provocative thought. What if the most powerful royals are the ones we almost never hear from? Think about it. Diana stole headlines. Meghan Markle commands global attention. Even Camilla, reluctantly or not, has stepped into the spotlight. But Catherine disappeared. And yet, her absence screamed louder than the presence of others. So who was she really? Catherine Worsley was not born to glittering palaces or centuries-old crowns. She came from North Yorkshire, the daughter of Sir William Worsley, a baronet. Hers was a life surrounded by countryside rather than court intrigue. Horses, not thrones. Pianos, not pageantry. Her childhood was filled with a kind of freedom Edward Windsor could only dream of. Do you see the irony already? A girl raised in quiet liberty would one day be bound to a man raised in suffocating duty. The contradiction was baked into their story from the very beginning. She studied music, trained as a teacher, and nurtured dreams that had nothing to do with waving at crowds from gilded balconies. She was, in every sense, the opposite of what the monarchy was grooming for Edward. But perhaps that's why he fell in love with her. After all, what is more intoxicating to a man trapped by the crown than a woman untouched by it? Let's pause and ask ourselves, was Catherine's attraction to Edward about love or about sacrifice? Imagine being a young woman, intelligent and free, and being asked to step into a world where every movement, every smile, every silence would be scrutinized. Did she truly know what she was giving up? Or did she only realize it once it was too late? The wedding of 1961 looked like a fairy tale. St. James's Palace, the pomp, the ceremony. Photographers captured smiles, bouquets, the kiss that sealed the union. But beneath the veil, Catherine was stepping into a life she was not built for. And this is where the seeds of tragedy were sown. Because unlike other royal wives, Catherine was not a natural performer. She did not crave the cameras. She did not thrive on public duty. The relentless cycle of appearances, speeches, and ceremonies drained her. Slowly, it chipped away at her spirit. And the palace, rigid and unyielding, had little patience for a duchess who faltered. And so, Catherine began to withdraw. At first it was subtle. A missed event here, a cancelled appearance there. But over time, the absences grew longer, the silences deeper. By the 1990s, she was almost invisible. Headlines asked questions. Where is the Duchess of Kent? Why has she vanished from royal life? The official explanation was ill health. But was that the full truth? Or was there something darker she was protecting herself from? And here's the contradiction. By stepping back, Catherine became more interesting. Her absence became her power. While others clamored for attention, she disappeared, creating a mystery that endures to this day. Even now, after her death, people are asking, what was really going on behind those palace walls? Let's not forget, Catherine was also unique in her choices. She converted to Catholicism in 1994, an astonishing decision for a royal, considering the monarchy's historic tension with the Catholic Church. It was an act of independence, perhaps even defiance. Do you see the pattern? The puddle splash in her youth. The retreat from royal duty. The conversion. Catherine's life was defined not by compliance, but by quiet rebellion. And who stood beside her through all of it? The Duke. Loyal. Protective. A man who knew the monarchy demanded one thing, but whose wife demanded another. His entire life became a balancing act, duty on one side, love on the other. And this is where the secret begins to grow. Because Catherine's choices, the withdrawal, the silence, the conversion, were not just about her. They were about both of them. And the Duke, bound by tradition, absorbed the cost of every step she took away from the crown. Now imagine the private conversations between them. Catherine confessing her struggles. The Duke reassuring her, even as he knew the monarchy would never understand. Two people living in a gilded cage, whispering to each other in the dark, plotting survival in a world that demanded perfection. Doesn't that sound less like royalty and more like a survival pact? And here's the emotional punch. For decades, Edward covered for her. He made excuses. He bore the public weight so she could find private peace. But now, with her gone, all of those excuses, all of those whispers, all of those secrets are his alone to carry. No wonder he says, I won't survive. But let's dig even deeper. Catherine was not weak. Don't mistake her withdrawal for fragility. This was a woman who chose to live life on her terms, even within the suffocating monarchy. She taught music in schools. She worked with charities. She lived quietly but meaningfully. And yet, in doing so, she created a contradiction the monarchy still cannot explain. How could a duchess simply walk away from duty and still be respected? Maybe that's the real secret. Maybe Catherine's silence was her loudest act of defiance. Maybe her choice to vanish was a message that even inside the most rigid system, a person could still carve out freedom. And the Duke? He bore it. He loved her for it. But now he's haunted by it. Because with her gone, the freedom she created dies too. He is left only with the system, the duty, the empty corridors of Kensington Palace. And that, perhaps, is the true meaning behind his words. He cannot survive, not without her, and not within the cage she helped him escape from, even if only temporarily. So what happens next? What does the Duke do with the memory of a wife who defied the crown in her own quiet way? What does he do with the possible letters, the confessions, the secrets she left him? And what does the monarchy do when one of its own becomes a symbol of human fragility rather than unbreakable duty? Because here's the haunting cliffhanger. The Duke is not just remembering Catherine. He is replaying her choices. And whispers inside the palace suggest he may follow her example one last time, with a decision that could shock the monarchy to its core. What kind of decision could a grieving Duke make that would shock the monarchy to its core? That's the question now hanging in the air, whispered in hushed voices behind palace walls. When a man says he cannot survive, when he admits he has no anchor left, does that mean he will fade quietly, or does it mean he will act boldly, one last time, in the shadow of his wife's defiance? Imagine this. For 6 decades, Edward Windsor has been the model of duty. Always in uniform, always present, always dependable. The Queen's loyal cousin, the silent shadow at her side. He never courted attention, never made headlines, never broke ranks. And yet, at the end of his life, after losing the one person who mattered most, he faces a choice. Does he die as the man the monarchy shaped, or as the man Catherine freed? Here's the irony. Catherine's rebellion was silence. But Edward's might be the opposite. After all, grief does strange things. It strips away fear. It makes a man stop caring about appearances. What if, in his final days, the Duke decides to speak. What if the secret Catherine left him becomes his final act? The truth he refuses to take to the grave. Can you imagine the impact? A royal of his standing, so close to the Queen for so many years, breaking silence with revelations the palace never wanted aired. It would be devastating. And yet, isn't that exactly what Catherine did in her own way? Refusing to play the role, refusing to smile for the cameras, walking away from the script? Could it be that Edward, in following her example, is preparing to deliver a message not just of grief, but of defiance? But before we rush ahead, let's sit with the loneliness that drives these thoughts. Picture the Duke now, in Kensington Palace. The halls are filled with portraits of ancestors, their stern faces glaring down at him like reminders of duty. Every room has memories of Catherine, the chair she favored, the piano she touched, the soft scent of her presence still lingering. And yet, every room is empty. What would that silence do to you? Would you not start questioning everything? Would you not begin to wonder what loyalty to the crown is worth if it leaves you so utterly alone? This is the contradiction that now defines Edward's life. He gave everything to the monarchy, his youth, his service, his loyalty. But at the end, the only thing that sustained him was Catherine. And now that she is gone, the question is brutal. What did it all mean? Did the crown repay his loyalty? Or did it simply take and take, leaving him broken, hollow, and burdened with secrets? And here is where we circle back to the possible legacy Catherine left behind. A letter, a confession, a story untold. Insiders say the Duke has been seen clutching a small, leather-bound box since her death. A box he keeps close, never letting anyone else touch it. What is inside? Jewelry? Keepsakes? Or words? Words meant for him, and perhaps the world, once he is gone? If that box contains Catherine's truth, then Edward is indeed carrying something the monarchy would prefer to remain hidden. And his decision, whether to keep it closed or to open it, could redefine how we remember both of them. But let's ask the bigger question. Why would Catherine burden him with this? Was it trust? Or was it a challenge? Did she know that he, too, was weary of duty, that he might one day want to cast off the chains and speak freely? Could this be her final gift? Permission to rebel, even if it destroys his image? There is a tragic beauty in this possibility. Two people, bound by love, navigating the suffocating world of monarchy. She rebelled quietly in life. He may rebel loudly in death. And together, their story becomes less about fading into silence and more about leaving behind an earthquake. But here's the twist that few are considering. The Duke's decision may not be about the monarchy at all. It may be about survival, not of himself, but of Catherine. He may want the world to know who she really was, to shatter the narrative of fragility and paint her instead as a woman of choice, of strength, of defiance. Isn't that what every grieving husband longs for? To keep his wife alive in memory, not as others saw her, but as she truly was? So what does he do? Does he write it down? Does he call in confidence? Does he leave instructions with his children? We don't know yet, but the palace is watching him closely. They fear what he might say, what he might reveal, because grief has made him unpredictable. And this is the most dangerous kind of royal, the one who has nothing left to lose. Let me ask you, if you had lived your whole life in silence, loyal to an institution that took more than it gave, and then the only person who mattered was ripped from you, would you keep their secrets? Or would you set them free, no matter the cost? That is the question Edward faces now, and his answer could either preserve the monarchy or unravel it. But one thing is certain, the Duke's frailty is growing. His health is failing. His words grow softer, his presence weaker. Time is running out, and that means the decision about Catherine's secret, about his survival, about his rebellion, will come soon. The only question left is this. When the moment arrives, will he choose silence, or will he choose to shock Britain with a truth that no one saw coming? Because if he follows Catherine's example, if he dares to defy the crown one final time, then the Duchess who vanished into silence may yet roar through history louder than anyone imagined. And the first sign of that rebellion? Insiders whisper that the Duke has already begun making arrangements that suggest his farewell will not be quiet at all. What kind of arrangements does a man make when he knows his end is near, and when he wants his final act to echo louder than his entire life of silence? That is the chilling question surrounding the Duke of Kent right now. It's not just about funeral plans or who will carry the flag-draped coffin. No, this feels different. Insiders suggest that the Duke has been quietly preparing something far more personal, far more explosive. A farewell that may speak not only to his grief, but to the truth Catherine left him with. So what exactly are these arrangements? Let's peel back the layers. First, there are whispers of a sealed letter. A letter already placed in trusted hands, to be delivered after his passing. Some say it's addressed to his children. Others believe it's meant for the monarchy itself. But here's the twist. There are rumors that a copy is intended for the press. Imagine that. A man who spent his life hiding behind palace walls, choosing his final moment to bypass them completely, letting the world read his truth without the crown's filter. Can you imagine the shockwaves? A duke, cousin to the late queen, lifelong servant of the monarchy, leaving behind words that the palace cannot control. It would be unprecedented, and it would transform his death from a quiet tragedy into a seismic event. But that's only part of it. Because alongside this letter, sources suggest the Duke has been organizing something that looks less like a royal farewell and more like a personal declaration. Instead of a strictly traditional service bound by royal protocol, there are signs he wants Catherine's influence stamped on his own goodbye. Music she loved, charities she cherished, people the palace might not expect to see. It's almost as if he wants his last act to say, "I lived not just for the crown, but for her." Do you see the contradiction? A man defined by duty, planning an ending defined by love. A man whose life was shaped by monarchy, shaping his death around the woman who pulled him away from it. It is both heartbreaking and defiant. Now, let's zoom out and think about why this matters. Funerals are not just private moments in the royal family. They are global spectacles. Every choice, from the hymns to the guest list, is symbolic. If the Duke's farewell includes Catherine's fingerprints, it becomes more than a memorial. It becomes a statement, a challenge to the narrative. A reminder that his life was not just about loyalty to the Queen, but about devotion to the woman who chose silence. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. There are reports that in recent weeks, the Duke has met privately with confidants, sharing pieces of Catherine's story he never spoke aloud before. One insider described it as unburdening. Another said he seemed determined to leave no questions unanswered. Could it be that he has decided to break the silence himself before death takes him? Could he be preparing to release Catherine's truth, not as rumor, not as speculation, but in his own words? If that happens, what would it mean? Would it tarnish the monarchy, exposing yet another layer of fragility? Or would it redeem Catherine, painting her not as a fragile duchess, but as a woman of choices, struggles, and courage? Let me ask you, if you were in his position, staring down the end of your days, holding the secrets of a woman you loved more than the crown itself, what would you do? Would you protect the monarchy one last time? Or would you honor her by letting the world see the truth she carried? And now comes the twist no one expected. The Duke has reportedly requested that one particular memory of Catherine be included in his farewell. Not a royal engagement, not a charity gala, not a polished speech, but a story from their early life together, about laughter, simplicity, and freedom. He wants it spoken aloud. Can you see what that means? It's not just nostalgia. It's rebellion. It's him saying, "Judge me not by my medals or my title, but by the love I chose and the life I defended in silence." This changes everything, because it suggests his arrangements are not just about death. They are about rewriting the narrative. For 60 years, the palace controlled how people saw Catherine. Quiet, fragile, absent. But now, through his goodbye, Edward may give her back her voice. A voice that the world never really heard. And yet, here lies the danger. The palace does not like surprises. They do not like unpredictability. If they suspect the Duke is planning something unscripted, something that exposes too much, they may intervene. Quietly, discreetly, but decisively. Could that be why he is moving so quickly? Why insiders describe him as urgent, almost desperate? Perhaps he knows his time is running out, not just physically, but politically. That if he doesn't act soon, the palace will silence him as they silenced Catherine. Think about the tension in this moment. An elderly Duke, grieving, frail, yet suddenly bold. A monarchy nervous, watching, wary of what he might do. A family caught in the middle, torn between protecting their father and protecting the institution. And all of it hanging on the question, What did Catherine leave him? And what will he do with it? We may soon find out. Because according to one account, the Duke has already told his children, "You will understand everything after I'm gone." Doesn't that sound like a man who has already decided? Doesn't that sound like someone preparing to let the truth out, no matter the cost? So here we are. A countdown. A frail man making arrangements. A family holding their breath. A monarchy bracing for impact. And a world waiting to see if the Duchess who lived in silence will speak louder in death than she ever did in life. But the real question, the one nobody dares to ask aloud, is this: will the Duke survive long enough to see those arrangements carried out? Or will grief take him first, leaving the palace to bury not only a man, but the truth he wanted to set free? What happens if grief takes him first? What if the Duke's body gives out before his plans are complete, before the truth Catherine entrusted to him is released? Would the monarchy seize control, locking her story in the vaults forever? Or would his children, perhaps torn between loyalty to the crown and loyalty to their parents, honor their father's unspoken wishes and let the world know what really happened behind palace walls? These are not abstract questions. They are urgent, because already, whispers circle that the Duke is weaker than he appears. His public outings have grown rare. His steps are slower, his voice softer. At 90, the line between living and fading grows thinner each day. So the race is on, between the palace's desire to preserve silence and the Duke's desperate push to keep Catherine's truth alive. Let's dig into the heart of it. The Duke is not the first royal to face this conflict. History is littered with princes and princesses who carried secrets to their graves, secrets that, had they been spoken, might have rewritten the monarchy's story. Think of Princess Margaret, trapped between love and duty. Think of Edward VIII, exiled for a woman. The Windsor family thrives on silence. But Edward, Duke of Kent, is different. He has lived his entire life in the shadows, and now, for the first time, he may be ready to step into the light, not for himself, but for Catherine. And here's where the contradictions sharpen. The Duke has always been the picture of discipline. Military man, loyal cousin, public servant. He never rebelled openly, never courted scandal. But his private life tells a different story. By choosing Catherine, by protecting her retreat, by covering for her silence, he quietly defied the very system he served. Isn't that the greatest irony of all? That the man known for loyalty may, in the end, be remembered for defiance? Now let's ask the harder question. What could be in that secret Catherine left him? What truth is so heavy that Edward himself admits he cannot survive without her? Could it be personal, something about their marriage, their private struggles, her health, her decisions? Or could it be bigger, something that reaches into the monarchy itself? Imagine, for a moment, that Catherine knew things the world never suspected. The palace is not just a home, it is a fortress of whispers. She was there during crises. She watched scandals unfold. She saw decisions made in smoke-filled rooms. And though she withdrew from public duty, she did not withdraw from awareness. She knew, and Edward knows that she knew. So when he whispers, "I won't survive," maybe it's not just grief. Maybe it's the crushing weight of being the last witness to truths that could destabilize the monarchy if spoken aloud. Can you imagine living with that kind of burden? But here's the twist that no one expects. Insiders suggest that one of the Duke's greatest fears is not death itself, but what happens after. That if he dies without controlling the release of Catherine's story, the palace will bury it forever. They will sanitize her memory, reduce her to a footnote, erase the parts of her that mattered most. And that, to Edward, may be the true meaning of not surviving. Because survival is not just breathing, it is legacy. And if Catherine's legacy dies with him, then he feels he has failed her. Think of the tragedy in that realization. A man who fought wars, who stood beside a queen, who represented continuity for a nation, reduced to a husband desperate to keep his wife's truth alive. Does that not strip away the glamour of royalty and reveal the raw, fragile humanity beneath? And yet, this is what makes the story so gripping. Because we are watching not just the decline of a man, but the unraveling of a system. A system that thrives on silence, now facing a man who may refuse to stay silent in his final days. So what happens next? Does Edward manage to outpace grief long enough to finish his arrangements? Does he leave behind a letter, a tape, A document that will one day explode into public view? Or does the palace swoop in, silencing everything, leaving us only with speculation and whispers? This is the cliff edge we are standing on. And here's the chilling hint. Some say Edward has already recorded something. Not just written, but spoken. His own voice, preserved. A message meant for release after his death. Can you imagine it? The Duke of Kent, his words echoing from beyond the grave, his tone frail but defiant, telling the world what Catherine could not. It would be historic. It would be devastating. But here lies the danger. If that recording exists, where is it? Who holds it? Can it be trusted to survive the machinery of the monarchy? Or will it vanish mysteriously, swallowed by the crown's endless appetite for control? The clock is ticking. Edward is fading. The palace is watching. And Catherine's truth hangs in the balance. So I ask you, what breaks first, the man, the monarchy, or the silence? Because one thing is certain. The Duke cannot survive without her. But perhaps, just perhaps, her story can survive through him. And yet, if his words are true, if his frailty is as deep as those closest to him fear, then the next public appearance may not be a revelation. It may be the last. What if the Duke's next appearance before the cameras is not to reassure the public, but to say goodbye? Can you imagine it? A frail figure stepping out from the palace gates, perhaps for the last time, his face carved with grief, his body trembling under the weight of years and sorrow. What if that moment is not just another royal duty, but a final act, a closing curtain on a life defined by contradictions? This is where the story darkens. Because when you look at the Duke of Kent today, you don't just see a man in mourning. You see the embodiment of fragility itself. Once a soldier, once the epitome of discipline, now barely able to walk without support. And yet, behind those fading eyes lies something more dangerous than weakness: determination. The determination to control his own ending. Ask yourself this. When someone is this close to the end, when they no longer fear scandal, disgrace, or consequence, what might they say? What might they do? Isn't that what terrifies the palace the most? Not his death, but his voice before death? Let's rewind. This is not the first time Britain has seen a royal collapse under grief. Think of Queen Victoria after Prince Albert's death. She wore black for 40 years, retreating into mourning so deep it reshaped the monarchy itself. Grief can move nations. Grief can change history. And now, with Edward's words, "I won't survive," we are watching the opening act of another royal grief that may define more than just a family. It may define the monarchy itself. Because here's the contradiction. The crown demands strength. The crown demands that royal smile, wave, carry on. But Edward isn't carrying on. He's unraveling, in plain sight. Isn't that the one thing the monarchy fears most? That the mask slips, and the world sees how fragile its pillars really are? Now, imagine the next public event. Perhaps it's a commemoration. Perhaps it's a charity appearance. Perhaps it's even a family gathering where cameras linger too long. Edward steps forward, microphone in front of him. He begins with the usual platitudes: gratitude, duty, tradition. But then his voice cracks. And instead of the carefully polished script, he speaks from the rawness of his heart. "I cannot do this without her," he might say. "And I will not pretend any longer." Can you hear the gasp? Can you see the headlines? In a world addicted to royal perfection, a confession like that would be an earthquake. But here's the deeper twist. Insiders say the Duke has become increasingly restless, that he has spoken to his children not just about arrangements for his death, but about the burden Catherine left him, that he fears time will run out before he can pass it on. Doesn't that sound less like resignation and more like urgency? Less like a man fading away, and more like a man preparing for one final, shocking act? And what if that act is not silence, but revelation? Let's be honest. The monarchy has survived wars, scandals, abdications, divorces. But what it cannot survive easily is truth told at the wrong time, in the wrong way. And Edward knows things. He knows things from the inside. He was there during the Diana years. He was there during scandals we only half understand. He was there during Elizabeth's reign, standing closer than most ever realized.